Hi there and welcome back. So we are in the modern zone and we're definitely going to talk some current events and gun safety on this one. So just be aware of that. So this is Batgirls number 17. As you can see, this particular cover, who watches the Batgirls? Quis custodies ipsos custodiate. It kind of reminds me of Who Watches the Watchmen, which came from Juvenile, and that's where we got the Watchmen, of course. And then you see this pretty cool cover here. I don't ever get the variants, but that's pretty cool that Ian is showing. But this one, I was just thinking is, I don't know, it seems a little dopey here. Like, what exactly is going on? None of them seem to be taking anything seriously. Baz could be shrugging. Steph or Cass is like trying to scare Steph, and then here Steph is not having any of it. Very interesting, and it does not tonally reflect what goes on inside of the actual issue. So I've done a lot of talking, and I always require, I don't always, but I always ask, could you please? And it's an intense time in my life with exams and everything else breathing down my neck. So I said, Ian, please, would you mind recapping this issue? So Ian, please take it away.
Of course. So in Batgirl 17, Grace O'Halloran, sporting her eye patch, interviews Gotham District The Hill residents for the Aparo Park Jubilee. But she is frustrated that none of them that she interviews are locals, muttering about gentrification and how no one gives the Batgirls credit for making the Hill safer. Steph, Cass, and Kyle Mizuguchi are out for the Jubilee, and Cass drags Steph off to dance. Their jubilant jubileeing is tragically interrupted by a gunshot, and Steph herds the civilians into Mr. Dollywall's bookshop for safety. Then the Batgirls change and seek out the sniper. They find Grace's cameraman shot by the sniper, and while Steph gives him CPR, Cass seeks out the gunman. Later, Commissioner Montoya is briefed by Officer Brooks, then talks to the Batgirls. Cass and Steph train intensely to catch the sniper. Steph reveals that after being shot and briefly killed, see Batgirls number 15, by her dad, her anxiety about catching the shooter is much stronger. That night, as Grace has an alcoholic relapse in grief at her friend and cameraman's critical condition, the Batgirls stake out the rooftops, then decide to break up an illegal gun sale by the Hills Angels to an undercover, drunk, and frightened Grace. Steph tries to get them to go home in a combined show of force, battering disarm, and reason, appealing to their better nature. But the frightened gang isn't backing down. Things look ugly, but suddenly the sniper attacks again. Cass saves a gang member, but they fire back wildly. The Batgirls kick the gang into an empty grave and tie them up, as Oracle cuts the lights and helps them out as mission control. Steph runs as a distraction for the sniper as Cass runs toward the shooter. She makes it to the sniper's nest, but only finds 3 bullets and a note ominously saying, 1 for each Batgirl.
Wah, 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 wah. To be continued. And then yeah, the art didn't give credits
Is by
here.
Rami Rodriguez and colors by
Yes.
Rico Renzi.
Yeah, it's interesting. That pairing is interesting because it's not like I recognize Robbie, but when he does his own coloring, it's got kind of that funk to it, like the pop funk. Whereas there's some interesting coloring. Let's see. Yeah, just I don't know. Cass in particular, some of the shading just looks really interesting, like this panel here. Just yeah, it seems different a little bit. I'm trying to put my finger on who it reminds me of. Was it Gotham? Do you remember that Supernatural title that came out?
Gotham by
That
Midnight?
yes, doesn't it
Yeah.
feel like that? Doesn't that art kind of feel like that
Yeah.
a little
I
bit?
actually got to talk to the main artist for that book at C2E2, Ben Templesmith.
Okay,
And he's got a very sketchy style, and Rodriguez's sort of thin lines,
yeah,
especially right here with Grace's hair, um, almost looking like tentacles. That's very characteristic of what Templesmith likes to do in his
yeah.
sort of horror influenced style.
And that's a highly underrated book, I have to say. That was a really good book.
Yeah, I really liked that book
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
I think I did a Patreon only podcast for the Batman universe about it.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Very cool. So just like these, as we warm up to kind of get into the big stuff, did you find this an interesting panel, this middle panel down here, where these two characters or just two people off the street are like tack, and then all of a sudden they turn to each other and are just talking to each other? Did you find that a strange interaction there? Like during an
I don't know
interview
if
when
it
two
really stuck
people
out to me.
turn to each. Oh, okay. Well, it's just like the way, because they're all smiling and then all of a sudden they look very serious and they're just talking to themselves even though they're being recorded. And I felt like they were automatons. I wondered if something was about to happen with them.
Well,
But
I mean,
I guess that's just me.
after the last issue,
I
automatons
know.
could be anywhere.
It could be, yes. I do love the fact that the the Batgirls are just in the background of this recording, and then and she's talking about them, and then of course they actually get interviewed. And then there's Kyle. Yeah, sadly no Maps. I wish Maps had been there.
Well, they
Uh
call it out. They say she's at fencing, which is
yeah.
pretty funny.
Yeah. I do have to point out this butt shot here, which was unnecessary, but here we are. Also, you can see the abs as they're dancing. Um, okay. I also thought this was an interesting and odd transition for Kyle in this part because he says, Steph, you and Cass handled that really well. And then all of a sudden, I'm so glad you're safe. What can I do? So just for me, odd transitions in this issue. But again, I kind of nitpick this book apart, unfortunately. Um okay. Do you now this issue is probably this came out in April. Let's say it was written February. Probably 2 months prior, maybe 2 to 3, would you
Probably
say?
January or December,
Okay.
actually.
So we have in this nation, the United States of America, have had, I think it's like 143 mass shootings or shootings. Let's go with shootings. And we're only in April, so that's, let's not calculate the average because that'll be pretty bad. Now in January, of course, it was just starting out, but literally this week there have been I think four. There was a birthday party, and then three people getting shot by doing something mistakenly, going to a house, a driveway, and a car in a grocery store. This was all this week. This is all this week. So I would almost, let's just say that I mean this is taking place in April. So let's just say that they wrote this in response to what was going on. Do you think it's too soon, for a story like this where a gunman is shooting on some sort of gathering? Or do you think it's just something that should constantly be brought up until change happens? So this is probably the heaviest political talking that we're going to get to. Now we know that I think there was something in Las Vegas at a country music festival that was pretty recent. We know of the Pulse shooting in Orlando that happened a couple of years ago. So this is like uber realistic. There's like no fantasy about that. And even if we get into the shooter at the end, it seems like he's kind of verbally writing a manifesto, talking about the people who are actually heroes, all of that stuff. So, do you have any thoughts on this particular storyline? Because it's pretty heavy. And are we ending the run with this, with a mass shooter potentially?
So there's a lot of questions there.
Yep.
Trying to figure out where I want to start. I think the first thing I'd say is that this feels very different to me than most of the shootings that have hit the news. This much more feels like either the Dallas police rally shooting or the DC sniper.
Okay.
Because a sniper attack is very different from the kinds of mass shootings that we saw at, for example, Louisville or most school shootings.
Yeah,
Those
for
are up
sure.
close, usually done with a lot of handguns or shorter range violence. This is long range violence, and it's qualitatively different, and it is terrifying. And I think they do a really good job of it. Um, with regards to your question, is this too soon? Again, since I view this as being much more calling back to a very specific type of gun crime, that is sniper assassination, um, I don't feel like it's too soon.
Mhm.
Um, my personal opinion is that, well, I actually really, it's funny. Where I come down on gun control is kind of weird because as a more conservative person politically, I am inclined to be in favor of the citizen being armed, but I don't feel particularly passionate about it. In terms of I don't own guns personally. So my family does. I don't have a problem with that. But I feel like if I were to own guns, I would need to practice with them. So I would be responsible. And I don't want to spend that time and money. So I choose not to own a gun. Um, I think the problems that drive the shootings tend to be much deeper than the availability of guns. I do think that guns tend to intensify the attacks, but not cause them. And so I think it's good to show people dealing with these things because it's real. Um, but I'm not convinced that I am convinced there is no quick fix.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Well.
as we go on into this comic, I really appreciate how it deals with that. I
Mhm.
think that is not a simplistic screed. I think it actually delves into motivations in a more nuanced way than you might expect.
Mhm. Do you feel like the authors are coming down on anything? Do you feel like
I
you
mean, I
need
think the authors are fairly typically going to be in favor of gun control, and
Mhm.
I think they do a good job of not portraying everyone who disagrees with them simplistically, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. They do. I mean, the positive thing from this issue, of course, is that no one dies, though there are some serious
So far,
injuries.
let's hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I know. Yes, we'll find oh gosh, what if they finally kill off Stephanie Brown at the end of this run? Could you imagine?
She's
Issue
already died in
19?
this round. I don't think they're gonna kill her
They're gonna
again.
do it again. They thought that, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's just interesting that, yeah, if this was written in January um or February, that time is different, but we've had all these we've had issues in the past. Obviously, it's not a new issue, but it just literally read this today because I've been so busy. So it was just crazy that I opened this up. Well, actually, I read the Batgirls and this today, the 53, 54. So I not only had gun control issue or a little girl with a gun in one of the issues. I then had this and I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And I think it will be interesting to see what the reception of this particular issue would be, in the future, if things changed or at another time period.
I
Um,
hope I feel that this last half of the Batgirls run has been a lot more thoughtful and well constructed than the first half. And unfortunately, that means that it's not going to be as well remembered because people usually buy the first trade,
right.
um, and then maybe don't finish the run.
Yeah,
But I hope that the final trade of this run gets some good sales and people remember it because I think that's where a lot of the really good stories.
for sure. Yep. Um, do you feel like Cass and Steph have any political alignments? This is not something that I think pops up here. But do you feel like that is a care and concern for them? Are they activists or are they too young yet? They've not yet found themselves.
Um, Cass and Steph are corporately owned characters, and so I think that editorial is generally going to steer writers away from making them activists, um, because partly because Batgirl is supposed to be a figure that is marketable to a wider range of audiences, and activism tends to really narrow the range of fans and readers. Like you'll have really intense fans, but I think that especially if they're on a hot button issue, you're gonna rule out a bunch of people who disagree with that issue. Um, you can see this by the way people react to Stephanie's pregnancy storyline in the 90s. What happens in that storyline was very mainstream, but the political landscape has shifted, so it now feels a lot more contentious, um, depending on where you fall on those issues. I personally would prefer that DC keep them this way so that fans who are more conservative like myself or fans who are more liberal can both find themselves in Stephanie and Cassandra and Barbara. Because I think that that is the great thing about art, that it takes us away from the immediacy of this or that policy proposal and this or that specific incarnation of a moral conflict, and allows us to find common ground so that we can build trust to have discussions that can lead to solutions. Because I think if we only like characters who are exactly like us and we form a bubble of people and media that agrees with us, then we start to see ourselves in a Manichaean struggle to the death with evil. And you cannot win that struggle because either you wipe the other people out, and that's not really a victory, or you lose. Um, and the struggle is never going to go away. We're never all going to agree on these difficult issues. Um, and those issues will change. Obviously, before guns were invented, that wasn't the issue. But there have been very many different issues that have torn people apart. And once you think you've solved one issue, another one pops up. So I would prefer that really inspirational characters like Batgirl be more about shared humanity and dealing with tough political issues, but not really being activist. Because I think that that encourages more of our tribal and black and white rather than ability to connect and form bridges with other people.
I have like three thoughts. Hopefully, I remember all of them. So, first question is, what are your thoughts on Green Arrow, which I think goes against everything you just said in terms of a corporate character having a hard political alignment?
Well, interestingly, Green Arrow tends to spout a bunch of fairly middle of the road liberal rhetoric, but he's never really an activist.
Okay.
He's also a massive hypocrite. And I think that it's unfortunately telling that Green Arrow has not had a comic for the last 3 years.
Hmm. Was the last one Black
Now,
Canary,
we are
Green
looking
Arrow?
at a new Green Arrow comic coming out, and I'm very excited about that. But I think that he does narrow his appeal because of that.
Gotcha. Um, Barbara, I think, also is someone she is someone I think that breaks your mold because I think there is some I think she was obviously involved in politics, and I think given her friendship with Alicia and Alicia's wife that everyone's forgotten about, I feel like she should be like we have to kind of assume some activism on her part, and I think there's less of a gray area in who Barbara is. So do you feel like she is alienating in the way that I am presenting her?
I think it's very telling that even though Barbara has been involved in political campaigns both as a candidate and as a staffer, they almost never deal with any real policy issues.
Okay.
I mean, what does actually that congressperson or whoever it was that she was staffing for actually stand for? Do they even state her party? You can assume it, and I think that we are meant to assume certain things, but they never state it.
And then final question is you don't want the Batgirls to be activists, but don't you think that that is almost the perfect thing for someone out of costume to be doing?
Could you? I don't understand what that means.
Stephanie Brown and Cass out of costume, don't you think activism would be the logical thing that they're doing as Steph and Cass? They're taking up some sort of cause and fighting, whether it is, for their neighborhood and protecting people in their neighborhood or a marginalized community potentially.
We'll see how that plays out in the next couple issues because there are hints in the solicitations that that may be something that's happening.
Okay.
Um, I personally think that there are a lot more productive things you can do than being an activist, but that would be my perspective coming from my both political philosophy and my own tendency to think that it is better to produce than to be an activist.
Okay.
Not that activism is necessarily not productive, but I tend to believe that activists tend to be much more easily manipulated rather than having agency or being actual starters of change. I tend to be extremely cynical about how activism works.
I guess so.
I tend to think that the people in charge are still the people in charge, and activists are usually used as tools rather than actually being instigators of change.
Interesting. Interesting. But if that is the case, then w- how can there be any hope for change? I mean, how does
Well,
anyone know that we're unsettled with what's going on or dissatisfied?
I have two responses to that. One
Uh-huh.
is more philosophical, and one is more spiritual.
Okay.
The
We
philosophical
allow
is
both of
that
those on this podcast.
yes, the philosophical is that just because I believe that the people in charge are the people in charge and are really the ones driving it doesn't mean that you can't affect change. I just think that you have to affect change in different ways. And that may not be flashy or sexy or exciting. It usually looks like volunteering for campaigns and being staffers and making connections with people who have money and power because like it or not, money and power are the things that change things. So if you can either obtain money and power or influence people with money and power, I think that's um, much more likely to affect change than what most people think of as activism. And you could think of that as being activism, but I don't think that the sign carrying or protesting or mass rally activism is really the kind of activism that gets changed. Again, I think that those tend to be used rather than starting change. Um, the spiritual is that I think that real hope comes from personal growth. Um, as a Christian, I believe that that comes from my sanctification, my becoming more like Jesus. And I think that that's the only way that we can really change. And I think that is true no matter what you believe about policy solutions. I think that we need to become better people, and that's how we change. And I think that since that's, in my view, a supernatural process, there's always hope.
I mean, I 100% agree with you on on the spiritual part for sure. I just might slightly disagree with you on the philosophical part. But hey,
Of course. And that's
that
why we have conversations, right?
absolutely, absolutely. To move, I guess, back to the comic, do you feel like Mr. Dolly Wally, wait, is his name Dolly Wall, because I like
Is
his
that how you
pun.
pronounce it? I was stumbling over it. I was like,
Well, because Dolly Wall to Wall books.
yes, I know. That's a great pun.
Yeah, so um I wonder, do you feel like he might know? Because it's interesting, this blurb here, it's dangerous, but you know that if you absolutely must leave, because these are teenagers. Remember that originally the writers wanted them to be 12, 13, but that was a little too young. So these are teenagers, and he's letting them go out into an active shooter situation. Do you think he might have an inkling that these
Well,
girls
they
are the
are
Batgirls?
neighbors.
Yes, they are.
Um, I think we're meant to think about that. I
Okay.
don't know for sure, um, but I do think that we're meant to think about that. I think it'd
Avery,
be kind of cool. I mean,
yeah.
I personally don't really care that much about secret identities because writers aren't particularly interested in writing that kind of plot. And honestly, if you read a lot of those really secret identity focused stories, they tend to be really nitpicky and they tend to make our main characters seem kind of like jerks, in my opinion.
Mm. I would, if this were an ongoing title, which is about to end, would be, if he does in fact know their identity, would be amazed to see, it would be amazing to see an issue where it is his perspective going through all of the issues. So, like, all of this of
Oh,
when
that
the
would be great. Like a day
Batgirls
in the life
yeah, like, when the
of
Batgirls
Mr.
arrived
Dollywall.
up to and you would see him, and I'm getting this idea because of I think there was this, Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, where after the revelation that, like, Mary Jane knew all along, basically, well, from a very particular fight that Peter was Spider-Man, and you start to and that issue, I can't remember, it's like 236 or something like that, I don't know. They show like all these different fights from her perspective, like she was there, she saw all this stuff. So it'd be cool if, but it's not gonna happen. I'm trying to think of anything else. I remember I really liked who was it that was like apologizing to them? I don't know if it was it? Oh, yeah, 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 just Babs. I mean, she's not even well, she does appear at one point, but she's more of a oh, she's talking I didn't even realize this is Fido 5 that she's speaking to. Okay. So, what a great team where Babs is talking through this, mechanical dog there, but I wish I had more to give you, but mostly I want to say that I'm thinking about you both if you need to talk, which I thought was really beautiful. But this is probably a moment that I would love to have Barbara actually be there with them because she survived a shooting, Steph survived a shooting, and I think, being in this type of shooting situation is a completely different emotional you'll have a different emotional response. So that I think we're missing that particular piece.
I am
Yep.
really puzzled by the choice to send Babs off. And part of me wonders if it was editorial who said you can't use Babs as much because we know that Brian Q. Miller was told that in the
Yeah.
second half of his Batgirl run that he couldn't use Barbara as much. Um, and we know that Barbara is a big character in Nightwing and
Yeah.
probably going to be in Titans as well. So maybe editorial was like, well, she's going to be in two books, so you
Oh my
gotta pull her
gosh.
back, and that really bums me out because I still look back on that old I mean it's not old but it feels old uh Futures and Batgirl um where you have all three Batgirls in the field being Batgirl together, and I still think that was what I hoped that this series would be more of.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Double standard for sure because Batman can be in however many books, right? If
I
we're
mean,
in
to be fair,
Marvel,
Batman sells, and
yeah.
unfortunately, these books don't sell as much, even though
As
I buy many copies.
well. Oh man. Very sad with Grace here.
I thought it was
Even
really
though
sad
she
to see her falling off the wagon.
yeah, even
That was really
though
hard.
yeah, and even though she has this cold and hard exterior, she really cares for Rocky, and this is what's troubling her. It's interesting. She says, damn them to hell." I wondered who the them were. I was concerned it was the Batgirls. I don't know if it's the city has kind of let her down, even though it was picking herself up. Do you have any thoughts on who the them is?
I think it's everything. I think she sees the world as collapsing around her.
Yeah. And then here she is buying some guns. I'm surprised that the Batgirls didn't see her because she was right there. Well, she was right there in the middle of it, and then she kind of skirted to the side and then ran away. But I'm a bit nervous as to what's going to happen with Grace. That'd be very sad if we kill her off as well.
It's a
Um,
very nerve-wracking story for sure. Seeing Steph
yes,
running from a sniper is like, ooh.
yeah. Um, yeah. I do you have any other thoughts? Anything else? Any burning questions?
I really appreciated that they had Grace be one of the people buying a gun, and that the Hills Angels, even though they're clearly
Mutants?
being dumb and foolish,
Yeah,
they do see themselves as trying to protect their town.
yeah.
So I don't think that it's a simplistic story dealing with a hot button issue. So I appreciate that there's more depth to characterization than I would have expected personally.
Yeah, and I mean, it begins with Grace talking about how the hill has grown and gotten better. And then you've got these, yeah, it ends with the hill may not have grown and gotten better, but actually these people really care about it. But they're coming at it from two different angles. The mutants come at it from one way, and then the Batgirls come at it from another. So it's definitely different ideologies are abutting, I guess, or coming up into conflict with each other. Out of 10 cup nudes, what would you give this issue?
Well, last issue was really rough for me. So this feels like a maybe a bigger step up than it would have been coming after 14 and 15. What did I give it? I did the review on Batman. So I gave it a 7. Um I think I do like a 7.5.
Okay. I would agree with you and say
Um,
7.5. I feel like I gave the previous issue a 6. So it's a step up, I guess. Sorry, I
the
may have
previous
interrupted
issue
you.
I was just very disappointed in. It didn't work for me.
And here I found the one panel that Barbara appears in right there. Okay.
Surrounded by screens.
Yep. Per usual. Okay.
I
Well,
really hope she comes out in at least the last issue, if not the next issue. I really want League of Batgirls, you know?
oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think people were teased like other people could join the Batgirls, and people were like, "Oh, is it going to be Charlotte?" No. No one else is coming. This is it.
Wait, who's Charlotte? Oh, you mean
Charlie?
Charlie?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well,
I remember people were
Charlie
like thinking, "Oh,
and
Misfit."
Betty and
Yeah.
um who else? Helena. Like people had all these ideas and I was
Yep.
like,
And it's not going to happen.
honestly, I'm okay with the three main ones because they're my favorites. I do love almost all the other Batgirls who have been Batgirl, but these three have a real special place in my heart. So I
Yes.
am okay with a focus on these three.
Two and a half.
I just kind of wish that it would have been three rather than 2 plus 1, you know?
Yeah. 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 I just said, yeah, 2.5.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess since I have you here before I move on, what would your thoughts be if Steph and Cass entered a romantic relationship?
Um, I don't really see it.
Okay.
I know a lot of people do, so I'm not saying that I don't see where people are coming from,
Mhm.
but I personally have always seen Cass as very much. I don't want to necessarily put a label on her, so I wouldn't say necessarily asexual, but
Mm,
she's just so focused on other things and doesn't seem to get a lot out of romantic relationships.
sure.
And I have friends who really love the Steph and Cass relationship. I have friends who really love the Cass and Superboy relationship. Um, so I'm not saying your ships are wrong or anything like that. I personally don't see it. I still really ship Tim and Steph together because I grew up with that
Sure.
relationship and I really love those things. And I know Tim has his own relationships and is exploring his sexuality right now, but I still hope that they come back together at some point. I'm also, as a big Gotham Academy fan, you were the torchbearer for that for me. I like this Steph sort of organically growing in a sort of flirtatious way with Kyle. I think
Yeah.
Kyle's a great character. I am kind of sad that it seems like Olive has sort of disappeared from the scene, but that happens in high school. People leave, and I think Kyle and Steph are both great characters, and I think they could be great together. So I'm interested in that as well.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where I'm coming from.
Sure.
I'm not saying I don't see why people would think that Steph and Cass could get together romantically in this series.
Hmm.
I don't think it's going to happen, and it's not something that I would prefer to happen.
Sure.
But I'm not saying that it would be wrong
Yeah.
for other people to see that or want that.
Sure. Yeah. I think I did see Brendan Fletcher had posted something about like a Gotham Academy, some sort of specials coming out. I don't know if it's
Yeah,
available
unfortunately,
anywhere.
that's really frustrating to me because there was that Maps story in Batman,
Yes.
and then there was a black and white story with Maps and Batman. And then in the holiday anthology Saved by the Bell Rev, they had an sort of a Gotham Academy reunion with the original creative team. So they had those three different stories, and they're recollecting them all in one issue. But they're not even so. There's no original content. There's no new story,
Oh, okay.
and there's no new cover even. They just took an interior shot and added a bunch of like Photoshop effects to it. And so I'm kind of
Oh,
bummed that there's not even a new cover because I've bought every single one of those because of the Gotham Academy content. I
yeah.
wanted those Gotham Academy stories. And so I have them all, but they're not even giving me a new cover to incentivize me to get this new piece of Gotham Academy. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
irritated.
Sorry about that. I do also like the Stephanie and Kyle relationship, though I think that's I don't understand it right now because it's very like, are they or are they not? They have these conversations that they're also confused about.
Well, they're both
If,
getting over their last relationship. So
yeah,
to be, they're sort of, they don't want to be each other's rebound.
sure.
And they said that kind of explicitly.
Hmm.
But they also they are attracted to each other. They do have those romantic sparks. So that's why I say I like the organic growing. It's not rushing. It's not instant shipping. It's not OTP. But it feels real to me and fun.
Instant shipping. Yes, yeah, for sure. I can't, and I think I in the past have perceived Cass as being asexual. I think that she's not a romantic though. Like I could see her being in a romantic sort of thing, but there's no sex involved. So I could almost see that as, holding hands and things like that with Steph.
I
But
think that would be
who knows?
tricky for Steph because I think Steph is very.
Much of a sexual being.
I think she loves with her whole body and heart.
Sure. I can see that.
So
Yeah.
I think that would be difficult for Steph if that's how they wrote that. And again, this is a lot of like speculation. So
Oh, of course.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I do actually have an anime watch list. I have two of them, and one of them is in common. So first, I finally watched Fruits Basket Prelude, which came out in 2022. It was an hour and a half. This is the synopsis. Despite Kyoku Honda's tragic death, her vivid memory lives on, providing guidance through times of hardship to her close ones. However, Kyoku was not always the wise and radiant person that she is fondly remembered as in the present day by her daughter Toru. Feeling deserted by her own family and rejected by society, a young Kyoko abandoned stability for a life of delinquency, jeopardizing her education and future. Fortunately, her descent into despair is interrupted by a fateful encounter with her husband to be, Katsuya, who has recently started his teaching internship at her school. Yes, don't look too closely at the ages there. It was a bit, I was thinking about that. I was watching. With a composure surprisingly unaffected by Kyoko's tantrums, Katsuya quickly wins her over through his gentleness and attention toward her, sincere gestures that she has never received before. As the two grow closer together, Kyoko opens her tormented heart to him and, along with it, a door to new horizons. And they don't get together until she's actually like of age. And then part of it, like maybe like 20 minutes or so, was a refresher in the POV of Kyo and as he and Toru got together, and then you see like some new snippets of his and Toru's life. Post the season 3 finale. But yeah, this was good, but it was sad. It was hard to watch. And then Suzume, which just came out 2023. You can probably find it in theaters. I think it literally came out last Friday. So you could probably find it. 2 hours. Here we go. On her way to school one day, Suzume Iwato stumbles upon Sota Munakata, a young man searching for abandoned areas. The high school girl directs Sota to a nearby ruin, but out of pure curiosity, she herself decides to head to the same destination. Once there, Suzume discovers an isolated door with a dreamlike universe lying beyond it, a place that she can see and feel but not enter. A strange stone rests on the ground nearby, but it turns into a cat like creature and scurries away when Suzume lifts it. Suddenly afraid, she heads back toward her school, not realizing that her act of leaving the door open will have consequences. And, removing the thing too. With the keystone released, the evil within the other universe can now freely escape and wreak havoc throughout Japan. Intending to correct her dangerous mistake, Suzume joins Sota, whose true goal is to prevent evil from festering in finding and locking all open doors before the country is destroyed by these worms. So you've seen Suzume. What are your thoughts on Suzume?
I loved it. I thought it was absolutely beautiful, as
Mm,
all Makoto Shinkai's films are. Well, okay. I've only seen four of his films. I've
okay.
seen The Place We Were Promised When We Were Young, or however that's translated, Your Name,
Mm,
Weathering with You, and Suzume.
yeah.
Your Name broke my heart. It's so powerful and
Yeah.
painful. I don't know if I can rewatch it for quite a while, just because of how painful that revelation in the middle is. Um, I think my favorite is probably Weathering with You, even though I acknowledge it's not quite as good as Your Name. And so I would say that Suzume wasn't quite as good as either Your Name or Weathering with You, but it was still really, really good. And just a feast for the eyes and ears, because he does a great job with sound design and music as well.
Yeah. Also did is it 5 centimeters per second?
So I know that's a film he's done, but I refuse to watch it because everyone tells me it's super depressing.
It is very sad. Yeah.
So
Yes, yeah.
I struggled enough with Your Name that I don't want to do
Okay.
the sad version of that.
You haven't seen Graveyard of the Fireflies, have you?
I refuse.
Okay, good job. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say if you yes, so I wouldn't recommend that. I Your Name is my favorite. I have
It
watched
is.
that multiple
It's
times,
amazing.
so I do very much love that. So going into Suzume, I knew nothing about it. I had seen a reel on Instagram that was just like a really quick snippet of like her opening that door and the guy, and that was it. I had no idea. And then an IGN person had done another reel that said like, if you like body switching from Your Name, then you'll like this because a guy turns into a chair. And I'm like, I don't know what that means at all. And I had done a lot of work on Monday and it at work because I wasn't called to sub anyone. And so I was like, let me I think I'm gonna go see Suzume. So I got to go see Suzume and again, no expectations. Yeah, it was marvelous. I think Your Name is still my number one, but this is like really it's like almost overlapping in number two. Um Dealing with grief and love and oh my gosh, yeah, they're just so I was just talking with Harry last night when we were playing video games that it's also one of the few, if perhaps the only anime feature film or television show that a character is frequently changing hairstyle and clothing because Suzume in each place, right, has a different hairstyle and she's getting clothing from people, which that's a hilarious thing is when like these people are getting her to do stuff like clean their little boarding house, babysit the children. But I want to watch it again to see like how does her hairstyle reflect what she's doing at that point, at that particular city. And then of course at the very end she goes back because she kind of like putting on her armor goes back to her original hairstyle and school getup and everything. So it's very much like a ring composition. But that was just something like I really latched onto because you just maybe there's one hairstyle change because we see that in Your Name. Or if you watch anime series, maybe there'll be changes in school uniform because they've aged up in hairstyle. So you can tell that there's something. So that was just something that was pretty cool. Loved the soundtrack. I've been listening to that as at work as I've been doing some schoolwork. Yeah, I can't speak highly enough for that. It was very heartbreaking at the end when gosh, I don't want to like spoil too much, but just like the moment where she's lost that one and then the totem is like now it can be together and she like just lambasts her
No,
and it was so and then yeah and then that cat is
that
yeah
was one
just
creepy cat.
oh man turns it and the other one was when it like really took a turn was on that road trip and her aunt lays into her and I was like
Oh, that was
whoa
intense.
whoa it was intense so there was definitely a lot going on in there which I think is the beauty of his films is that you have this very in your face storyline, but at the kind of like what I like about Ari Adner's films, but at the back, you've got something else that's actually underneath the surface. That's a deeper theme. So yeah, highly recommend. Did you see the dub or the sub?
I always see dubbed
Okay.
because to me, film is a visual medium, and if I'm reading subtitles, I don't catch all the visual details.
Okay.
Plus, I don't speak Japanese, so when I hear Japanese, it distracts me more than I get the emotion because the cadences, inflection, and the way they express themselves is not how I expect as an English speaker. So to me, dubbing, as long as it's done well, which these days because of the anime community in the US, it tends to be done pretty well, um, is the preferable option. And I know that makes me a heretic, but you know what? Okay.
No, I think I mean, I know that there are people obviously that are purists and might get on you for that, but I think it's choice. I with like these new features, I definitely go into the sub. I so like Belle, which I really loved, Your Name, and this, yeah, I've only seen it in the original Japanese and the subtitle. And like all the Miyazaki films, though, I see in the dub, just because that's where I first watched them, and I love those voice casts. For me, with subtitles in general, I am more engaged with foreign films, I think, than English speaking films, which sounds interesting because of where my attention is. So I'm like really in there. I am watching facial features and seeing what's going on. I am listening to their voice and I'm reading. So it's like I'm really in there, and it's more impactful for me. But it takes a lot of like attention. Okay. Last thing is literature recommendation. Are you reading anything you would like to recommend to the peoples? Not the boys, apparently.
Um, yeah, I am actually. I listened to this great podcast called "The Rest Is History" with Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, a British historian, and Dominic Sandbrook, and they just did a Hundred Years' War series, and they recommended the book Sir Nigel by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle,
Mm.
who's most famous, of course, for writing Sherlock Holmes, but he thought this was better. I don't think he was right, but it's still quite fun. It's a heroic English versus French, chivalry, all that kind of classic knightly combat stuff.
Have you read Don Quixote?
I have not read the original. I read various
Okay, like
abridgments
adaptations.
and simplifications of it,
Gotcha.
but
Okay.
not that one.
I just wondered since, it deals with kind of knights and everything. Okay. And for me, I read assessment again and student success in a differentiated class for the second year in a row. Okay. I read The Stonewall Reader, which is by various writers, and it's a collection of excerpts and essays from before Stonewall, during Stonewall, and after the Stonewall riots. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume, which you can find on the next required reading with Tom and Stella, coming out in May, even though all those files are gone. And I also finished, which took me a long time because I was reading like one or two essays a day, which I recommend, kind of taking space and thinking about it. The 1619 Project, A New Origin Story. It says by Nicole Hannah Jones, but really it's by various authors that are writing on different essays. And of course, gets you to think about things in a different way. I learned a lot of stuff, so I recommend that. Okay, Ian, thank you so much for being here. How can listeners slash viewers support you? Where can they find you?
My Twitter at IBM Miller. On Twitter, I tweet a lot, mostly about comics and but also some about philosophy and theology and various thoughts. I do write a lot for the Batman universe, so batmanuniverse.net. Just search up my name, Ian Miller. I am one of the main hosts for the Batman Universe comic podcast. And on my YouTube, which is Miller number one, so that's my name, Miller, and then the word number, and then the numeral one. I do monthly reactions to DC solicitations. So if you want to know what I think about what's coming, you can watch me for 30 to 40 minutes just blabbing.
There you go. There was something I was going to ask you. Oh, are you still watching Gotham Knights?
Yes. I
Has
mean,
it
there
gotten
wasn't an
better?
episode this week, but
Okay.
I am up to date. I think that the show is absolutely terrible. It is very poorly written,
Okay.
very poorly thought through,
Uh-huh.
but I actually like Stephanie Brown. I think it's a good
Okay.
casting for her. And even though I don't like the fact that they've made her sort of a part of the wealthy elite
Mm-hmm.
kids, they have kept her mom being an addict, which I
Okay.
appreciate because that actually hasn't been in the comics for quite a while. And there, as a fan of Batman Eternal, there's definitely a lot of pieces of that they've woven into her character and her relationships with the other characters. So I don't recommend the show, but
Okay.
I'm still watching for my Stephanie Brown.
Have what's his face and Duella had hate sex yet
I do not believe that anyone has had sex unless you count Steph making out
with
with
that
that
guy in the pilot?
guy. I don't think they had sex though.
No, I think they were caught before. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So there has been no sex by the kids. So there has been sex by adult characters.
Whoa. Okay. Harper Rose, still a good character?
Um, I like Harper in the comics. I don't think she's particularly well done in the show.
Oh, okay. Did you think that in the pilot?
Well, I think everyone's terrible in the pilot, like
Oh, I
really,
thought she
really
was the
bad.
best part of the pilot,
Um,
with the exception of Robin dropping down there, Carrie Kelly.
I I didn't think that almost anyone was that good in the pilot.
Okay, okay. And then
Except, I
Carrie.
mean, and to be fair, I am mostly watching, and I'm just like, blah blah blah. Blah. Oh, Stephanie, like I watch while there's Stephanie. Okay,
Oh, I see. I see.
so I'm watching, but I'm really only paying attention when Steph's on screen.
I understand. Carrie Kelly, is she leading the team?
No, she's more of kind of a rogue agent. She
Oh, interesting.
contributes, but she does a lot more like stuff on her own. That's how I feel. I
Okay.
haven't done a super analysis, but she
Okay.
does a lot of like alone missions or missions where she's sort of taking the initiative by herself.
Okay. Okay.
And which makes sense since she's the one who's
Sure.
most trained in it.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll hate watch it. Who knows? Who knows?
It's not really worth it.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Well, remember you can send any questions or comments to backrollauracle@gmail.com. If you have anything you want to say to Ian, I can always forward it on to him. I always offer this, but no one has taken me up on it, especially with Donovan. Like the show on Facebook or follow it on Twitter at Backroll the Oracle. Subscribe to the show on YouTube for an uncut version. Support the Batman universe by subscribing to Patreon and follow the Batman universe on Facebook and Twitter as well. And once again, thanks to Mile High Comics for sponsoring Backroll the Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. And until next time, first Birds of Prey and then War Games. What do we say here?
Fly on, Babs lovers.
Fly on, Baz lovers.